Hello and welcome to the next episode of Cylinder Radio, podcast based on viewpoint diversity, specifically in education, because that is my background. And today I am really stoked to have a very important educator in the global conversation about education. Katharine Birbalsingh is a teacher, education reformer, head mistress of the Michaela School in the UK, and an author. And the reason why I wanted to reach out to her is not just to pick her brain based on all of her experience, but she was one of the very few, and I mean like maybe the only one in K through 12 education that has a large platform and a very public voice to talk about the culture wars and a lot of the bad ideas that are permeating society, but specifically in education. Everyone's talking about education and what the kids are getting indoctrinated into and all this kind of stuff, but none of them are teachers. None of them are in schools. They're all college professors or they're all kind of post-secondary stuff. So it was really, when I saw her work, I was like, okay, I really need to talk to her because I think we need help. So Katharine, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thanks for having me.
Can you just give us a very brief kind of setup of how you became this voice that's very public on Twitter and shows and podcasts and everything, pushing back against bad ideas in education? Like, how did you go from just a teacher to running a school and then now like this public figure?
Yeah, so I'm in London, in England, and I've always worked in the inner city and was a normal teacher. Then I was head of department. Then I ended up assistant head, deputy head. But over that time, I became really concerned with what I was seeing going on in schools. When I started off in teaching, I sort of believed the normal kind of lefty line of the reason why schools are failing is because there isn't enough money. And I came to realize that it was less to do with money. I mean, obviously more money is always nice, but it was more to do with bad ideas. And that I found that too many people in positions of seniority in schools, so principals, assistant principals, that sort of thing, weren't necessarily being as supportive as they should be of the teachers. And I found that teachers too often weren't teaching in the best possible way. And I started writing a blog called To Miss with Love, based on the book and film To Sir with Love, the film has Sidney Poitier in it. Great film. Anyway, I wrote this blog called To Miss with Love, and I called myself Miss Snuffleupagus because of Sesame Street, you know, you've got Mr. Snuffleupagus, Big Bird's friend, and he's like the big elephant, and nobody can see him except for Big Bird because he's the elephant in the room. So that's why I called myself Miss Snuffleupagus, which then got shortened to Miss Snuffy over the years. And I am now Miss Snuffy on Twitter, actually. People always wonder why. Well, that's where it comes from. Okay. And so I was writing, and it was cathartic. I would come home, write this blog, and say, little Johnny got his money stolen today, how awful it was. And various people would come on and argue with me, and it tended to be people from the left who would argue a lot with me, and they would tell me that I was conservative, and I would always say, no, I'm a really good person, and so if I'm a good person, I couldn't possibly be conservative. But in the end, I came to realize through the blog, where people would discuss, because there was no Twitter then, they would discuss in the comment section that I had a lot more in common with the conservatives than I did with the people who leaned to the left. So I eventually kind of came to terms with the fact that I must be a conservative myself. And then Penguin had wanted to publish my blog, and it was all going to be done anonymously, and that happened. But then my publisher knew somebody in government and had me meet with him so I could tell him all my kind of solutions to education. The Conservative Party then asked me to speak at their political conference. I was a bit naive, didn't really know much about it, went along, gave this speech, and the audience stood for me because they really liked what I was saying. And then the press kind of turned on me and said, like before that, I was just a teacher. Nobody knew who I was. Yeah. Whereas at that point, everybody knew who I was. And then I was in the papers and all sorts. And I ended up without a job. I was told I'd never work in a public school, state sector, we call it here, again. And that if I wanted to remain in teaching, I'd have to teach in a private school. I didn't want to do that. And just at that point in 2010, this was in 2010, the Conservative Party here had set up the idea of free schools. And a free school in England is the same as a charter school in America. And you guys have had charter schools for the last nearly 30 years. We, however, only started in 2010. So I decided at that point I'd set up my own school, because the only way that I could teach the disadvantaged kids who I've always taught and love was essentially to set up my own school, because I was told I would never get a job. So because I'd spoken at the Conservative Party conference, you're not allowed to kind of align yourself as a teacher with conservatives. And so I was kind of toxic in that sense. So I set up my own school. It took 3 years. It's called Michaela. We are in Wembley, near Wembley Stadium, in London, with the same disadvantaged kids I've always taught. And we now have about 800 kids. We've built up every year. We opened in 2014. And so I was thrown into the limelight then. So since then, I've been interviewed by various newspapers and so on. And I was kind of this poster girl for free schools, because it was new here, and I was always going around talking about free schools. But I've also managed to get out our ideas about what makes for a good education. And then Michaela, the school, has really kind of taken off. We have loads of visitors that come here. I mean, at the moment, obviously there's COVID, so they don't come, but it was the case that we'd have 600 visitors a year. Normally teachers from around the world, so a lot of American teachers who've come. We've had Canada, Australia, Germany, all over the place, but mainly teachers in England, who then take ideas and go back to their schools. And we've had lots of people say lots of positive things about us. So through word of mouth and on Twitter, social media and so on, we've become quite popular as the kind of alternative to what normal schools do. So there we go.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's, just to see that process. When you said, conservatism is shunned in education, I had a couple of months ago, I had on someone who was, he came on my podcast, but he couldn't do video, and he had to disguise his voice like he was witness protection, like, yes, and then I go with it. And he said, because he's at a progressive school in Los Angeles, and he said, if they just found out that I voted Republican, I would get fired.
Yeah.
This is.
Oh, that's our pips, when children change lessons.
Yeah. No worries. Yeah, you're in school.
Yes. Yeah, we're in school. Yeah, so like what you just said, that's exactly right. So I used to write anonymously because I was terrified of being found out. And it was simply because the ideas that I was putting across were small c conservative ideas. Things like belief in personal responsibility, belief in having a sense of duty towards others, belief that the adult should be the authority and the child is, that the adult is in charge of the child. These kinds of ideas nowadays, we're not really sort of allowed to voice. So yeah, I felt like this guy you were talking about.
Why do you, is it like a big five personality thing? Is it like, because you're very, you're open, you're more like, the empathetic kind of gears in education? Why do you think that education is such a one-dimensional when it comes to like kind of group when it comes to ideas and things like that? Or is it like not, is it, 80% are, and then 20% are just peeing their pants scared to come out?
Yeah, I don't know what percentage, because of course they are hiding. But I'm not sure it's as much as 20%. I think it's fewer. Yeah. I do think that there is this monolith of thought in education, which is really scary when you think about it, because the progressives are always talking about how they want people to think outside the box. They want them to be critical thinkers and independently minded, when in fact, too often teachers are just, they all think in the same way. And in fact, you can tell, what they think about green issues, what they think about, I don't know, Brexit in this country, what they read the Guardian newspaper in this country. I mean, I can tell you all sorts of things about what they think. And 9 times out of 10, you're correct. So, and why is that? I think because often, I was one of these teachers, you go into teaching because you really care and you want to change things for the better, for the disadvantaged. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people on the right, I mean, not all of them, but I think a lot of people on the right are more inclined to think, well, I'm going to go off and get a job that I really like, or, I want to earn lots of money. I want to have a nice car. There's a certain selfish component there. And I think teachers tend to be quite selfless. Now, that's not to say that all people on the left are selfless, but they are they do tend to be motivated by this idea of helping other people. And certainly teachers are anyway. They want to help. That's why they've gone into teaching. And so it attracts that kind of softy, kind of mushy side of the left of wanting to feel like you're a good person. People on the right don't tend to want to feel like a good person. People on the right, I think, tend to be more, they want to get it right. They're quite interested in the ideas, and they want to follow through on the ideas. So people on the right tend to, when they're criticizing the left, they tend to think people on the left are a bit stupid. People on the left, when they criticize the right, think that they're evil, right? Yeah, so, and teachers are all about being good. And I think that people on the left in teaching don't realize the damage that they're doing to kids who they want to help. I mean, it's a really sad situation. I see teachers killing themselves, working really hard for these kids, but they're doing the wrong things. And so the kids end up with a worse education despite all the efforts of the teacher. And that's because the ideas I think that are needed are small c conservative, which the left reject. And the left, of course, is mainly the teaching profession. The teaching profession is mainly left, I should say.
Yeah, well, and I believe it's a Thomas Sowell who actually wrote a book on charters recently. But I think it's a Thomas Sowell idea of judge a policy based on what it does, not what its intention is. And I think that there's so many intentions that are good. It's like, my intentions are so good, then how could this be bad? And it's such a disconnect there.
Well, and your audience should all read Thomas Sowell's book, Charter Schools and Their Enemies. It's a really short book written when he was 90 years old, which is pretty amazing. Yeah. And it's fantastic. It looks at Success Academy in the Maine in New York, which is a charter school, and compares it to other public schools around there. And in particular, compares kids who would have gone to Success had they been lucky enough to get a place. So in that sense, you're comparing similar families, because the families who get in, the families who don't get in are still the kinds of families who wanted to go to that school. And the differences are stark. I mean, you cannot argue against the success that Success Academy has. So, and yet we do in education. The other reason why is, of course, the unions. The unions are so powerful in education. And I find that they do, well, they really help teachers take on board ideas that are not helpful to teachers, that are really quite harmful, not just to the kids, but to the teachers themselves.
Do you guys have powerful unions there too?
Yes, we do. Probably similar to yours, actually. I wouldn't say there was that much difference, except your way of hiring teachers is different. So you have what they call the Dance of the Lemons. You know the Dance of the Lemons? Do you know about the Dance of the Lemons that is in Waiting for Superman? The other thing all of your audience should watch.
Yeah, I watched it, but it was so long ago, I forget.
Don't remember. Okay, so Waiting for Superman, which is Geoffrey Canada. And funnily enough, Geoffrey Canada spoke at the same Conservative Party conference here in England, the same one that I spoke at. And the Conservative Party had flown him over to speak at the same conference that I spoke at. And so Geoffrey Canada, for your audience that don't know, is this African-American guy in Harlem who set up what was called the Children's Harlem Zone. And he had a map of Harlem, and he literally kind of blocked out certain blocks and said, right, these are the kids we're going to be looking at. And eventually he set up his own charter school. And amazing guy, amazing, the things he's done. And why am I saying this about Geoffrey Canada? Why did I start?
Oh, just about just charter schools in general, and about the unions being powerful.
Oh, the unions, Dance the Lemon. Yeah. So in the film Waiting for Superman, because Geoffrey Canada tells the story about how when he was a kid growing up, he was always waiting for Superman to come and save him, and he never came. And that really education is the thing that's going to save these kids, which of course you and I, we all know this. Yeah. And they explain about the Dance of the Lemons, which is that your unions are so powerful that if you want to move on a bad teacher in a school, all you can do is send him to another school. So you give him a good reference and he goes to another school, or he goes to the rubber room, of course, like in New York, where teachers are paid to just show up in some room and, you know, they can write their own novels or do whatever they want, but they get paid because it's better to keep them in the room, the rubber room, than it is to put them in the classroom. And so you send the lemon there. But the other school is also trying to get rid of a bad teacher, so they send the lemon to you. And this is the dance of the lemons, where the lemons are just being passed around from school to school. Now, there's a little bit of that here, but I don't think there's as much of that here as there is in the US.
Yeah, it's really powerful. And look, I think unions were good back in the day when it was like teachers didn't earn a good living. They were really underfunded, all that kind of stuff. Like unions have a place. I think public sector unions are a little tricky because it's not like you're going after Jeff Bezos and he has to make a decision about his money and how to like do that. It's taxpayer dollars, and our politicians, I mean, I'm in California, they're just like throw money around. So whatever you kind of ask for, okay, we'll figure a way to do that. I think teaching is a weird profession because you've been able to kind of transcend some of the barriers. Here's what I mean. I think education is one of the areas where it's hard to scale, and there really isn't, a whole lot of growth if you can't scale something. Like if you're a great fireman, you're a great nurse or something like that, you're focused on people. It's hard to scale. It's also hard to quantify. What makes a good teacher? I mean, I've been at different charter schools, and they try different incentive structures. Like if you get your kids to score this well on standardized tests, then you get a bump in salary. So what happens? Obviously, all the teachers just teach the test. But we're in this for the long game. So it's nice to have a 16-year-old say thank you, but it's really great to have a 30-year-old say like, you had an impact and I have a meaningful life now. Like we're not in this for quick. It's hard to quantify what makes a good teacher. How do you guys, or what do you think is the way that we need to get teaching to a point where it is a more quote unquote legitimate career? Because so many brilliant people who could be great teachers have no interest in going in it. They can't flex their creative muscles. There's not really the pay is not bad, but it's not terrible. I mean, it's not great. Like how do we get teaching to be a profession that is widely respected? Not many people, people will talk to you. You've transcended it, Katharine. I don't know I do know what you've done, but like, I don't know how you've done that and how you can make a roadmap for other teachers to get a voice as loud as yours on these big stages that need to happen. I feel like you're often standing alone as a K through 12 representative in these circles, these, like these prominent circles pushing back in the culture wars. Does that make sense?
You say I'm alone. I mean,
it feels that way, yeah.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I don't know. Well, it's interesting what you just said about what makes a good teacher, because I would say that there are some clear ways of knowing whether somebody's a good teacher. It's just that we haven't necessarily defined them. When I say we, as a culture, so when it comes to becoming a doctor, we know what makes a good doctor, and we teach them how to be a doctor. So you take a surgeon, for instance. The surgeon doesn't go into surgery and think, today I'm going to be creative. Let me figure out what I'm going to do. This is going to be fun, And nobody would imagine that you're smiling. So you think that's ridiculous. Obviously, we wouldn't let them do that. And yet in teaching, that's exactly what we think. We think, well, we want to be creative. Everybody should just go in and do whatever they want. And I don't think they should. I think it's a profession, just like, say, being a doctor is a profession. There's certain things that make you a good teacher, just like there's certain things that make you a good doctor. Now, obviously, you're going to have some differences, and you do have to think sometimes outside of the box. But meeting your children at the door, for instance, is a good thing. It's never a bad thing. And saying hello to them as they come in and welcoming them in. And when they're leaving, great lesson today, really enjoyed that. And when they're coming in, expecting good things from you today, Johnny. That sort of thing. And you make sure you say it to the kid who you gave the detention to last time, so you get him on side. And that relationship building is important. Other things that make for a good teacher: standing at the front of the class with the class facing you rather than being in grouped desks. Now that, for instance, is a very controversial thing to say in 2021. In 1950, it would have been perfectly normal. And somehow we've lost our way in terms of what works. Anyone who has tried this out knows that it is far better to have the children facing you. They can see you. Children with special needs struggle when they're looking this way and the teacher's over there, and they have to keep doing this to see what the teacher's doing. Any naughty child knows that it's far easier to keep their attention on the teacher when the teacher's in front of them instead of looking at their friend the whole time. So there are loads of things like that. Having routines about how to give out the books, ensuring the children all show up with a pen, and that your standards of discipline are so high that nobody would dare show up to your class without a pen. All of these things make for good teaching. And there's a long list of them. And all of the teachers at Michaela, that happens. And so one of the reasons why by word of mouth we've become relatively famous is because when people come here, what they can't believe is that they see that in every single classroom. and they see loads of children's hands up, loads of excitement for learning. And they think to themselves, how is it possible in the inner city that all of these kids are behaving, are engaged, are really clever? And when I say clever, you know, there's lots of them who struggle with basic maths, you know, down at the bottom. So I'm not, when I say they're clever, what I mean is they're as clever as they can be, that they are fulfilling their potential. So teachers who come get really excited about how much is being achieved here. And I would say one of the reasons why, the main reason I would say that what's being achieved here is the consistency that happens from classroom to classroom. But that we as teachers often reject consistency because we have this idea of, oh, well, I want to be able to be creative. And that isn't what we should be aiming for. What we should be aiming for is for as much learning to take place in the classroom as possible. And there is an optimal way of making that learning happen. And I think too often we reject that and we say, oh, learning can happen in all these different kinds of ways. Look, the best kind of learning that happens when the kids are looking at you, when you are leading the learning. I always say the teacher needs to be driving the bus, and it's the teacher's job to make sure everybody's on the bus. So Johnny, he's talking to his friend. Oh, he's jumped off the bus. Got to get Johnny back on the bus. Oh, little Amy's fiddling with her pens. Got to get little Amy, come on, back in the bus. And you're keeping them on all the time, and you are driving. And I always say, you know, you're driving to Rome. You need to make sure you are driving the bus, because if you let the kids drive the bus, you know, either they're going to crash the bus because they can't drive. If they manage to drive, some might end up in like Madrid, and others worse end up in Afghanistan. You don't want that, right? You want everybody getting to Rome. The only way you're going to get to Rome is the teacher is driving that bus and making sure they are on board. So that's what teachers should be doing. I think that too often in teacher training, we don't teach them that. And then people are kind of left to survive on their own in the classroom. And if you're in the inner city, my goodness, you're just trying to get through the day, right? Without a child telling you to F off or throwing things at you and so on, which is obviously not the way school is meant to be.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I think the schools of education, I mean, I went through it a while ago. I graduated college in 2005, but when we learned the basics, understanding by design and Bloom's taxonomy and things like that, I just don't see that being pushed anymore. I mean, or I don't see it being implemented in the classroom. There are charters that have done well in America. Ron Clark Academy is one in Atlanta. They raise the bar. They have those high expectations. Like, you bring a pencil. Yeah, that's like, but the famous adage of, teach a man to fish and he, eats for a lifetime, give a man fish, he eats for a day type of thing. But there isn't an option of just like figure it out on your own. Like, you got to walk the kids through it. If a kid doesn't show up with a pen or a pencil at Michaela School, like there is a consequence, but it's not like just get out of here. Like, you walk them through the process, right? Like, a lot of these kids, they don't know responsibility because they don't have any responsibility at home. It's a free-for-all at home. So when they walk in the doors, you have to teach them the steps of how to take small incremental movement towards being a responsible person. And that takes patience, and that takes, slowing down a little bit and working with them. Is that your take that you've seen or do they just adapt real quick because they see it's the norm?
Well, some of them, when they join us, do adapt, but I'll show you what you're just talking about. Mm-hmm. This is our pyramid, and we say that you want to get to the top of the pyramid and you start at the bottom. So, well, actually, some kids start not being on the pyramid at all, and they just don't know what to do. So when it says, take bringing in a pen, at first they bring in a pen because they want to avoid a detention, because they'll get a detention when they don't bring in a pen. And then eventually they think, well, actually, I quite like getting a merit when things go well. I mean, we wouldn't give them a merit for bringing in a pen, but imagine something else, making excellent effort on the homework because they want to get the merit. Then up here, it's because, it's because they want to impress their teachers. But up here, the idea, I always think these two are very similar, and then getting a great future. They understand here, it's a bit more about who they are, right? They're moving towards that. And at the top, it's who they are. So what I mean by getting to the top of the pyramid, when they bring a pen, eventually, it's because that's just who they are. So when I go to an interview and I take a pen, I don't take it because I think I'm going to get a detention. Right. I take it because that's just who I am. When I'm sitting and talking to you right now, I sit up straight, but that's just who I am. I don't think I'm going to get a detention. Now, our kids, when they start, they're down here. Eventually, they're sitting up straight because that's just who they are. So it's what you just said. You're teaching and supporting them to be able to get to a point where it's just who they are. I'd say too often in teaching, we imagine that children do not have agency and cannot choose. And so we don't want to punish them for not bringing in the pen or not sitting up straight or not doing their homework or being on time or whatever it is. We don't want to punish them because we feel like it's not really their fault. They come from poor families. Oh, it's difficult. Their parents just divorced, whatever it is. And then we make excuses. When in fact, actually, they have agency. They can decide. And there are many children who come through, who have terrible lives and still manage to do the right thing. And that's because children have agency. So once you understand that, then you can keep your standards high for them. Now, it's interesting what you said about Bloom's taxonomy, because I would totally disagree with Bloom's taxonomy. And that's exactly the kind of thing that's being taught to teachers in teacher training colleges. So I would argue that what we're taught to do in teacher training colleges is the wrong stuff. So all the teachers who come here to Michaela, we kind of reteach them on how to teach. And every single one of them, without exception, every teacher who has ever taught here will all tell you, I didn't know how to teach until I went to Michaela. That's what they'll say. And because there is a better way of teaching. There is, like, and that I realized, a lot of people will say, how can you say such a thing? There's just different ways and so on. Yeah, there are different ways of teaching, but there are better ways. And children will learn more depending on what style of teaching you use. And if you use a style of teaching, which is about telling them information, allowing them to do this, I always say, with the information so that they can analyze it and examine it and think about it. Maybe they do very quick pair work and then they come back to the teacher, where the teacher is very clear about leading that learning and isn't allowing the kids to do what they want and to have it be more child-centered, right? Child-centered learning, in my opinion, is bad. Teacher-led learning is good, because the teacher is in a position of authority. Now, that often to the left is poisonous. They can't bear the idea. You'll often hear teachers say things like, oh, I learn just as much in my lesson as the kids learn. The kids teach me as much as I teach them. And I always think, well, you must be a pretty rubbish teacher, because that's ridiculous. You've got a degree, you've been teaching for years, you're much older than they are, you're meant to know a lot more than them. Now, it's true that if I have a problem with my iPhone and I don't know how to do something, I go to the kids and I ask them, right? Yeah. So there are some things they know better than me, but they ought not to know better than you are the expert in the subject that you're teaching. It's ridiculous. Of course they don't know more than you, but we have got things upside down in teaching, and we teachers don't realize that we are our own worst enemy, really, and that it's our beliefs and ideas that actually make our lives so much more difficult.
I think that kind of speak comes from, like, you know, teachers who go into like the hood and say, like, they taught me about, you know, struggle. Like I learned from like students, like when a kid would be acting up and I'm like, I'm going to talk to your parents. Then he's like, good luck. Never met his dad, mom in prison for murder, lives with his grandparents and his aunt and his 3 cousins in a 1-bedroom apartment. Like I think what teachers might be saying, maybe not, maybe I'm giving them too much charity, but is like, I learned about, like, you know, the diversity of our population. I didn't grow up in a situation like that. I'm just baffled how these kids even get to school in the morning. You know, like just the real struggle. So maybe they're saying something along those lines. Maybe I'm being too charitable. I don't know. When they say, like, they teach me stuff like about like coming through hardship.
Yeah, although the thing is, I know from the kinds of kids we have, in the end, sometimes you just need to not deal with the parents. You just deal with the kid and you get the kid on board. And the kid is then coming in because he wants to please his teachers. And the kid is driven because of what he finds out. So when our kids start in grade 7, so year 7, but you're grade 7, when they start with us, we do what was called a behavior boot camp for 7 days. And we just have those kids in and we teach them how to behave in the Michaela way. And so they're really keen to prove themselves to us. And it's true that some kids are a bit embarrassed sometimes about, you know, of their parents and sometimes the way their parents behave, which is sad, obviously. But it does enable the child to be able to make different decisions to their parents. And I think it's important that the state give the child that option. I'm always saying that, you know, the point of education is to allow a child to change their stars. Because otherwise they just end up doing whatever it is that you would have imagined them to do. I want them to be able to fulfill their potential. And you only do that, I think, by providing a place of order and structure for children, where it's a bit more predictable. When I say predictable, they know that every time they go into the classroom, they're going to find the desks in the same rows. They're always going to find the teacher at the front, at the door, greeting them when they come in. There's always the same behavior system in every classroom. So we have merits and demerits and detentions. You can have a point system. It doesn't really matter what it is, but it needs to be the same throughout the entire school. There needs to be a strong leadership team at the top. That is one way in which I think your charter schools are far better than your public schools. And actually the way in which our schools here can often be better than the US schools is that you guys have this idea of administration. If you're a principal or an assistant principal, you got to get an MA in administration. And just the fact that you're called an administrator, I sort of think, what? Like, I'm not an administrator. I mean, and I don't actually do any teaching, but never in a million years would I consider myself to be an administrator. I do very little paperwork. I mean, I lead my school. That's what I do.
You interact with the students a lot.
What's that?
You interact with the students a lot. You're
kids, I interact with the staff. I mean, I'm mainly interacting with the staff, supporting them, helping them, making sure they're getting trained properly, making sure they know what they're doing, making sure they're supported with regard to the kids, making judgment decisions all the time on what kind of punishment this kid should get, what's going to happen over here, how are we going to organize lunch today? I don't know, whatever it is. I'm making constant decisions and I'm extremely busy. The idea of calling, I mean, look, there's nothing wrong with administrators, and I've got a whole bunch of administrators working in the school, but I'm not one of them. It's just absurd to suggest that I am. And I think that by calling your people, principals and assistant principals, administrators, is to take away from the role of leadership that they've got, which is so crucial. And it's also idiotic to give them this MA in administration. I've just never heard of such a thing. So I think that's all wrong. I think that without a strong leadership team, and of course that's what you've got in the charter schools. The reason why the charter schools are so good is because you've got people who own that school, who feel it's theirs. And then they're out in the front going, come on, teachers, follow me into battle. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. This is our ethos. This is what you need to buy in. If you want to be at Success Academy or at Uncommon Schools or whatever it is, KIP, you've got to buy into this ethos because this is what we're about. And that's exactly what we do here at Michaela. In the public schools, the feeling that I get in too many public schools in the US, there's no unity. There's no togetherness of this is what we all believe. The teachers come in and they're doing their own thing in their classrooms and the kids go from classroom to classroom and, oh, he's pretty strict, but she's pretty laid back. So don't worry about the pen there, but I got to bring the pen over here. And there is too much inconsistency. And so children fall apart in that kind of environment. They need structure and rigor. And they need teachers all singing from the same hymn sheet. But the teachers are not going to sing from the same hymn sheet unless there is leadership at the top. And that's the number one way in which I would be critical of the US system, is that structurally it is not shaped in such a way so that the leaders can be real leaders. Now, I don't know. I mean, I've been to a number of schools in America, mainly in New York, and New Jersey, been to Uncommon Schools. I've been to a couple of other charters. I can't think now what they were. I went to Jeffrey Canada School in Harlem, and I've also been to some ordinary schools in the Bronx and in Queens. And I went there really to see E.D. Hirsch's work. I don't know if you know E.D. Hirsch. So he's American, and he's a Democrat, actually. And he's about 93 now or something. And he's amazing. And I would suggest all your people read his work. His latest book, I think, is called Why Knowledge Matters. But he has another book, which is really a nice introduction to his work called The Schools We Need and Why We Don't Have Them. And E.D. Hirsch is a great advocate for knowledge teaching in the classroom. So all the ideas that I was just talking about the teacher leading and so on and imparting knowledge, E.D. Hirsch explains that really well. And another American who's really great for your people to read is called Dan Willingham. And Dan Willingham is a cognitive scientist, so he's not a teacher at all. He talks about how children learn, how the brain learns. And his book is called Why Students Don't Like School. And if you read those books, they'll explain really what is at the heart of Michaela and why I think we're so successful. Because we get how children learn. That's why once you understand how children learn, you then understand why there's an optimal way of teaching, right? Because you teach according to how children learn, as opposed to well, it just depends on the teacher's personality or whatever it is. And E.D. Hirsch explains how important knowledge is to be central. When I say knowledge, so Bloom's taxonomy devalues knowledge. And people who think like that think that, or child-centered learning does, because child-centered learning comes from the whole Bloom's taxonomy way of thinking, is all about, we don't want to fill their minds with ideas. They need to just come out with their own ideas, and we're going to draw the stuff out of the child. That's the idea there. And that the child can talk, the children can teach each other, because they're going to remember it more. That's what Bloom's taxonomy talking about, right? Now, the thing is that if children don't know this stuff, then they can't have opinions on it, and they can't be creative with it. So while I don't think the teacher should be going in there with the idea of, oh, I'm going to be so creative, we do want our children to be creative, but they need to have the knowledge first before they can be creative with it. So the point of the teacher is to give them the knowledge, get them to understand it and learn it. And sometimes you need to drill it, and there's nothing wrong with drilling knowledge, because once you drill the times tables, then they can start getting more and more knowledge to then be creative with their maths, right? But they can't do that creativity stuff unless they've been taught the basics. Yeah?
Yeah, the scaffolding, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's important for teachers to recognize that kids, students respect structure. They respect it, especially these kids who are from situations, like I said, who have zero structure at home. Eat whatever you want, go to bed whenever you want, but like, so they need it, they're craving it, and when they act up, they don't know how to say it, but they're saying, I need structure, please give me some structure. And they're gonna resist it, but they know that they need it. You know, there's a lot less focus on, I'm with you, there's a lot less focus on skills and skill building. And there's a lot of just pushing a lot. I guess what I want to get into now is like the politics, the politicization, I always screw up that word, of education. And when we say like, let's get teachers to implant knowledge, the teachers are ideologically possessed with a lot of this, you know, woke stuff. And then they're pushing that on the kids. And I guess I think might be a path, and I really respect your opinion. If you think this is a bad move, please let me know. But I'm thinking that the move would be give them skills, help them to be able to, even like the basics, like summarize. Can you summarize? Here, read Ibram Kendi, kids. Maybe, but can you even summarize? Like, do you know those basic things? Do you know like the words that they're using? Once they have skills, I think that kids are going to be harder to indoctrinate, harder to brainwash, for lack of a better term. You become more resistant to it if you've developed skills on how to think critically and how to, you know, actually read and process and things like that. So I think the way out of this ideological possession of American schools, everything going super to the left and not having a balance is to focus on skills so that kids can actually think for themselves. I don't know the way out of this, I suppose. I'm curious what your thought is, because we gotta right this ship.
Yeah. Well, it is true that the woke kind of thinking is taking over, certainly in America and somewhat here, but we're not as bad as the US at the moment. I think, to be honest, I think the way to try and persuade people to not do that is to demonstrate how it negatively affects kids, because teachers do want to help those kids. And they think, what happens is, they think to themselves, these are black kids. Black kids will identify with Kendi because he's black. And he talks about how much of a victim black people are. And the black kids know that they're victims. So let's all talk about how everybody's a victim, and they'll feel better about themselves. And they're, you know, somehow this will help their self-esteem. I think that's how they think. Now, what I would try and argue in trying to persuade them is, I would say, the thing is that it's the fish thing that you just talked about. You know, you might indulge them with a conversation about victimhood, and everybody feels happy in that moment. But if nobody really gets to learn how to read and how to be numerate and know some history and some geography and science and so on, then they're not going to be able to make something of their lives. And that while racism may exist, and while there may be all kinds of obstacles in front of these kids, the best thing you can do is equip them with knowledge and skills to be able to overcome those obstacles. And spending all your time indulging in a discussion about victimhood is not going to equip them with that knowledge and skills. Now, not only that, but it's going to give them a mindset of, the white man is up against me, I can't ever win because look how racist the world is, and I'm just giving up. And what we need to do is empower them so that they feel like they can go out there with a fighting chance. And the best way to do that, of course, is to teach them some English and some maths and some geography and history and so on. Because kids like to succeed and they go to school to learn. I believe this 100%. Every child goes to school to learn. But when they go, they then are naughty because it's just in their nature to be naughty, and they push back. And what they want is for us to go, no, 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 no. Well, I'm not letting you get away with that. And they love the strict teachers. They do. They always love the strict teachers. We named Michaela after a woman from St. Lucia who was an old colleague of mine. She was super strict. The kids absolutely loved her, right? Now, if we do that for them and we are on their side and we love them, the important thing is to love them and to do it with love. No, you haven't got a pen today? Got to give you detention. Come on, don't make me do it. Bring a pen next time. You know I love you. That kind of thing. Yes. The kids will bring the pen next time. And then you are instilling those habits that we spoke about at the beginning. So when they eventually leave school, they're not all twisted and angry and furious about how the world is racist and how they can't make it and what's the point. That's not how they feel. They feel like, look at my goodie bag. I've got English and science and math. I've got it all in there. And I'm going to go out there. I know how to sit up on a chair. I know how to bring in my pen. I know how to shake your hand and look you in the eye. I've been taught all these things at school, and I'm going to turn up on time for that interview. I'm going to bring that pen. I'm going to shake that hand. I'm going to get that job. Now, that's the best way to fight racism, not by indulging children in a conversation about victimhood. Yeah. Now, that's the thing we need to do, is persuade people, right?
Well, that's why I'm doing the podcast. That's why I left my classroom, to expand it to social media and things like that. You know, it's the soft bigotry of low expectations has become such the norm. But I love that you said that. I'm going to reiterate it. Kids respect and appreciate strict teachers. They do it with love, not the draconian, like we're in like you're bad for doing this, but you are strict with love and care because that's what you do. Every good parent knows that you don't let your kids just run around and do whatever they want. You give them structure. And I've seen that. I've been at several schools over 15 years, and I've seen like the students respect the teachers who hold the line and do so in a loving way. A lot of new teachers, I think, especially believe that, like, I want to be their friend. It's like, that's not, they will eat you alive because they know probably subconsciously that that's not good for them.
That's right. The thing is, kids know. Kids always know the good teachers, right? They know. And they will love you if you put yourself in a position of authority. Yeah. But too often we feel uncomfortable about being in a position of authority because we think, oh, that means we're big-headed, or we think we're better than them and all of this. It's not that you're better than them. It's that you're older. You're wiser. You're meant to direct them. It's okay. Be in charge. So, like I say, those small C conservative values, throwing the responsibility back on the child, not always saying, oh, it's because of racism. It's because of the poor school system. It's because of this. No, you didn't bring the pen. That's your fault. It's your responsibility to bring that pen in. And I don't care how difficult your life is. And that sounds like I lack compassion. You say, I don't care. People come in here and they say to me, yeah, but you know, you expect them to do brilliant homework every night. But what about that kid whose father and mother had an argument the night before? I said, well, he's got to find time around that argument. He's got to get the homework done. Because when you're having to deliver to some client later on, the client isn't going to care about what happened in your life. The client is going to expect the work to be done. And so it's our job to teach our kids to be resilient and to have a goal and to go after it. And that doesn't mean it's going to be easy, right? It'll be hard, but that's life. That's your lot in life. You got to take it by the horns and go for it. And, you know, that ultimately, it's about helping teachers who are often in privileged positions themselves to not feel bad about their privilege so that they go around apologizing for it all the time. We need to teach kids to be resilient so that they can overcome the obstacles in front of them.
Yeah, my wife has a small business and she tries to hire for like front desk, and you wouldn't believe how many people come in and can't formulate an email. She's like, your job is to basically write to clients, and
Yes.
they don't, so no one really taught them grammar. And so you might say like, well, that's too hard for them, but you know what else is hard? Being 24 years old and unemployed, and you can't get
Exactly.
a job now. So it's like, you're not thinking long term. You know,
Exactly.
I had a mentor teacher I really loved. And my wife was actually saying like, oh, what did she do that was so great? I was like, I don't remember anything except she said, when you say something, mean it. If you say like, hey, you get out your phone again, I'm gonna throw it up against the wall. They get out, you're like, oh man, I gotta throw it up against the wall now. Like you have to, they want that consistency, and that just has stuck with me. And in every school I've been at, I've had teachers say, you know, how come you don't have the same discipline issues I have? It's like the kids know, they know that if what the rules are, and they know what the consequences are if they don't. They know that I won't back down, like
Yeah.
ever. And then they go, okay, so they just like have the choice. So then when they make their decisions, even if it's a bad, they know if they skip class, which they do, that there's going to be a punishment. When they get caught, they're mad at themselves for getting caught or for disobeying. They're not mad at me because I'm consistent. I'm just like the brick. Like that's it. That's the way it is. They're not mad at me. They don't direct it at me. They kind of direct it at themselves.
Yeah. Well, we have a saying here, which is mean what you say and say what you mean.
Yes.
That is what, you know, number one rule.
Of what teachers should be remembering, like.
Hmm.
So the last question I have, because we've already done an hour and you're really busy, but like here, the last question I have is, a lot of teachers and parents are worried about this indoctrination of a lot of very, very far left politics in school. And you push back, like you take those arrows and you get called names, I'm sure, and you get, you know, labeled all these horrible things, all this stuff. But what advice would you give to teachers, like Mike, who I had on my podcast, Mike, and or parents who don't like what's happening, but they're scared, they're terrified to push back, to be labeled a racist or fired or have their kid kicked out. I was talking to a parent who she was pushing back, and the private school that she sends her kids to was like, I don't know if this is a good place for your kid. Like, so how do you approach this? Like, I don't know. I don't know what to do. I don't know if you have advice for them, because there are risks inherent to doing that. But what can you maybe a mindset or something like that, just to send to those?
It's very hard. And the thing is that, yes, I get cold names and I get hate mail and all sorts of craziness, but it is a little bit easier for me because of my skin color. You know, I particularly feel sorry for white people in this kind of situation, because then they get called racist and so on. And it's very hard. I think, for teachers, you try and do what you can in your own classroom. You know, you just try and shut your door and lock out Michaela, the woman we named the school after. That's what she did all her life. You just shut the door and you ignore the madness, and you try and teach what you can in the best way that you can. I think for parents bringing up their children, you try your best in the home. Try and find a school which is, you know, often more religious. The school, the less woke it will be.
Right.
So even if you're not a Catholic, or, you know, try and get them into a Catholic school.
Yeah.
Or any kind of religious school, frankly. Any religious school is not going to be so woke. If you have extreme woke things going on, you can certainly complain to the principal and, you know, state your ground, although generally speaking, they're not going to listen. So then you want to ask, I suppose, your children what they're being taught, and then try and counter it at home so that they hear the other side. Give them books to read, you know, books by, I'd say African American. I mean, I give my staff books by African Americans, actually. So Thomas Sowell books are great. Or there's a guy called Jason Riley. Jason Riley wrote a book called Please Stop Helping Us, which is about what liberals do to Black people and how they're trying to help, but you know, please stop, he's saying. And Jason Riley recently made a documentary, actually, which is on YouTube, which again, your audience can watch. If you type in Common Sense and Jason Riley and Thomas Sowell, you'll find it, just about Thomas Sowell's life. There's also other conservatives. I mean, you've got your real conservatives like Larry Elder or like Candace Owens, obviously, who are really quite extreme. But then there's other ones who are more intellectual, like John McWhorter and Glenn Lowry, who have this great podcast where they chat to each other. So I would suggest to parents actively to sit down with their kids and show them this stuff, actually, because you're not going to be able to change what they're being taught in the classroom, but you can at least give them an alternative point of view at home. I don't know what else to suggest, because it's a cultural thing that's kind of taken over everyone. And sadly, people feel like they're being racist to question this. And so the only people who can question it are Black people. And so, yeah, although there's a guy in New York who did a podcast with me, actually, his name is Charles Love. He has a radio station. He was telling me about how his 5-year-old is at school being taught all these diversity through science. And he was saying he's 5 years old. He said to the principal, this is ridiculous. Can't we just learn science? Like he said, they need to learn how to summarize. They need to learn how to do 2 + 2. I mean, and so it's worrying. And the other thing that parents need to realize is that a lot of teaching doesn't actually happen in schools. Too often, they're doing all of this woke stuff, or they're teaching badly. And so your child isn't learning as much as you would like. So don't imagine that all the teaching that needs to be done is happening in schools. You need to supplement at home. That's key. You must supplement at home. Go to the local shops, get the extra books, do some extra maths and English and so on with them, because they might not access it at school. And yeah, that's all I can suggest. I mean, and then obviously guys like you doing podcasts, us talking about it, I'm out there tweeting, you write articles, you do what you can.
No, that's great. I think that, even if you are, I wouldn't consider myself a conservative. I think some things I'm like pick and choose. So some things I'm conservative, some things I'm not. But to get that viewpoint diversity is, if they're only getting stuff from the left, then supplement some from the right. Or maybe in Alabama, they're only getting stuff from the right. It's all conservative. Then you got to supplement a little bit just so they can see that there's different angles on things. I think that's really good. And I think parents need to take responsibility.
It's an interesting point that you say in Alabama, but I doubt it. I doubt it, because the teaching profession is just so left-leaning. So I don't know. Perhaps in some of the religious schools, possibly, maybe, as you say, in some religious school in Alabama that's in some tiny village somewhere, maybe. I don't know. But,
teaching like creationism and stuff like that.
Yes, possibly. And that's something we don't have in this country, actually. So I don't know about that. Yeah, possibly.
I don't know. But yeah, just parents need to just the kids can go and have a bad teacher and still come out okay if they have alternatives, and then they can just be like, all right, well, that's one perspective, I disagree, but I'm getting something else at home. Yes. So what's the best place for people to find you, follow your work? Would it be Twitter? Do you have a blog still? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I do, but I don't write like sometimes I'm in the newspapers here and I write stuff, but then I'll always tweet it. So Twitter is probably the best place, which is Miss_Snuffy, SNUFFY, Miss Snuffy. Yeah. And that's where you'll find me.
Okay. Do you have an Instagram or no?
No, I just do Twitter. I don't know how you all handle all these different social media platforms.
I don't really use Twitter much. I only use it to try and find, speakers and people like you. So I usually use Instagram, but no, I'll put your Twitter handle there. Katharine, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to do this. These are important conversations, and I know that this will get to educators who are probably unfamiliar with you, who aren't on Twitter, who don't look up these, viewpoint diversity stuff online. So I'm excited for them to start, picking into everything that you've done. It's really awesome. Thank you for leading the way.
Well, thank you for having me.
Okay. All right. Take care.
Okay, then. Take care. Bye.